Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn English podcast.
My first day at university. Learn English through story. My name is Anna, and I still remember my first day at university as if it happened yesterday, because that day was not just the beginning of my studies, it was the beginning of a whole new chapter of my life, a chapter filled with hope, excitement, nervousness, and dreams about the future. And as a young woman stepping into the unknown world of higher education, I felt a mixture of emotions that words can barely describe. Because on the one hand, I was proud of myself for reaching this stage. After so many years of studying, passing exams, and preparing for the moment when I would finally enter the university gates. But on the other hand, I was also worried, asking myself questions again and again like, will I make friends? Will I understand my professors? Will I be able to live away from home? And will I succeed in this new world that feels so big compared to the small classroom I came from? And when the morning of that first day arrived, I woke up earlier than usual because I couldn't sleep properly the night before. My heart was beating fast, and I was imagining every possible scenario. But as the sunlight entered my window, I knew there was no turning back. Today was the day when everything would begin. So I dressed carefully, choosing my clothes with attention because I wanted to look confident, even though I was nervous inside. I packed my bag with notebooks, pens, and the map of the campus that I had printed out. And as I stood in front of the mirror, I whispered to myself, Anna, you can do this. This is your moment. Don't be afraid. And with that small pep talk, I left my room and stepped into a new world. The university campus was much larger than I had imagined. The buildings were tall and modern, with wide glass windows reflecting the early morning light, and students were everywhere, some walking quickly with determination, as if they already knew exactly where to go. Some standing in groups, chatting and laughing, as if they had been friends forever, and others like me looking around with a little confusion, holding maps or phones in their hands. And I realized that I was not the only one who was new. Many young women and men were experiencing their first aid just like me. And this gave me a small sense of comfort, because even though I felt alone, I was not truly alone. Thousands of new students were starting this journey at the same time, each with their own story, their own dreams, and their own fears. And as I walked through the campus gates, the air felt fresh, filled with energy, and I knew that I was entering a place where knowledge, opportunities, and friendships would grow. The first challenge of my day was finding the orientation hall, because the campus map looked simple on paper, but in reality the paths twisted and turned in ways that made me feel lost. And as I walked past the library, the cafeteria, and a large building that looked like the science block, I realized I had gone the wrong way. My heart started beating faster, not because I was afraid of being late, but because I didn't want to look foolish standing there alone without knowing where to go. So I took a deep breath and decided to ask for help. I saw another young woman standing near a bench, also holding a paper in her hand. She looked as confused as I felt, and so I approached her slowly and said with a smile, "Excuse me, are you also looking for the orientation hall?" And she looked up at me, her eyes bright with relief, and she answered, "Yes, I've been walking around for 10 minutes. I think I'm lost too." And we both laughed because at that moment we realized that we were in the same situation. And just like that, a friendship began. A friendship that made my first day feel less lonely. And her name was Sarah, a girl from another city who had also come here full of dreams. And together we searched again, this time with more confidence. And when we finally found the hall, we looked at each other and smiled as if we had just passed our first test at university. And maybe in a small way we had, because the first step to surviving in a new world is learning how to connect with others. Inside the orientation hall, hundreds of students were seated. The noise of conversations filled the air, and when the microphone turned on, the room slowly became quiet, and a professor walked onto the stage, introducing himself as the dean of the faculty. His voice was calm but strong, and he welcomed us with inspiring words, saying that we were now part of a community of learners, that the years ahead would be challenging but rewarding, and that this was not only a place to study, but also a place to grow as human beings. And as I listened, I felt both excited and nervous, again, because it sounded like a big responsibility, but also like a wonderful adventure. And I could feel the energy in the room. Every student was listening with wide eyes, some writing notes, others just sat quietly trying to absorb everything. And as I looked around, I realized that this was a hall full of dreamers, and I was one of them. And that thought gave me strength, because dreams are powerful when they are shared. After the orientation session, Sarah and I walked together to find our first class. And as we moved through the corridors, I noticed how diverse the students were. Some wore traditional clothes from their cultures, others were modern fashion, some looked shy, others confident, but all of them had one thing in common. We were here to learn, to build our future. And this diversity made me feel curious because I wanted to know their stories, their backgrounds, their reasons for coming to this university, and it reminded me that education is not only about books and exams, it is also about people and the connections we build with them. When I finally entered my first classroom, I chose a seat near the window because I always liked having a little space to breathe. And as I sat down, I looked at the professor who was writing something on the board, and I thought about how different this was from high school, because here the responsibility felt heavier. Nobody would tell you exactly what to do step by step. You had to take responsibility for your own learning. And at first, that idea scared me. But then I realized that it also meant freedom. Freedom to choose how to study, freedom to explore new ideas, freedom to shape my own path. And this thought made me sit up straighter in my chair, ready to face whatever challenges came my way. The professor began to speak, introducing himself and explaining the subject we would be studying this semester, and I noticed how carefully everyone in the classroom listened, some with notebooks already open, pens ready, while others just sat quietly trying to absorb everything. And as his words flowed across the room, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement, because this was no longer high school. This was a place where professors expected maturity, independence, and real effort. And I reminded myself that this was why I had come here, to grow, to push myself beyond what I thought I could do. And while I was writing notes, I noticed Sarah sitting 2 rows behind me, and she smiled when our eyes met. And that simple smile made me feel that maybe, just maybe, I was not as lost in this new world as I thought. Because sometimes the smallest connections can give you the courage to keep moving forward. And as the lecture continued, I became more focused, determined not to let fear control me, but instead to let curiosity lead the way. And in that moment, I promised myself that no matter how difficult things became, I would not give up, because I had worked so hard to reach this place. And this first day was the doorway to a future that I was ready to build step by step. After the first lecture ended, the students began to pack their bags, and the sound of chairs moving filled the air. And I looked around the room wondering if I should talk to someone new, and for a moment I hesitated, because starting a conversation with strangers is never easy. But then I remembered the words I had whispered to myself in the mirror that morning. "Anna, you can do this. Don't be afraid." So I turned to the girl sitting next to me and said, "Hi, I'm Anna. What's your name?" And she looked a little surprised but quickly smiled and replied, "I'm Layla." and we began a small conversation. Nothing too deep, just talking about where we came from and what courses we were taking. But even that short exchange made me feel stronger because every conversation was like a door opening. Every word was a step toward belonging. And I realized that friendships at university often begin with simple hellos. And I told myself that I would keep trying, that I would not hide in silence because silence builds walls, but communication builds bridges. And I wanted bridges, not walls, in this new journey of my life. When lunchtime came, I walked with Sarah to the cafeteria, and as soon as we entered, the smell of food filled the air. Voices mixed with laughter, and the long tables were crowded with students from every corner of the world, some speaking in their native languages, others already practicing English. And the room felt alive, full of energy and possibilities. And as we stood in line with our trays, Sarah told me that she was nervous too, that she worried about whether she would be able to handle the workload. And I listened carefully because her words were like my own thoughts spoken out loud. And I realized that many of us share the same fears, but we don't always say them. And when we finally sat down to eat, I looked around and saw so many different faces, so many different stories, and I felt lucky to be in such a place because university is not just about studying from books. It is about learning from people. And the cafeteria, noisy and crowded as it was, became a place of discovery, where you realize that you are not just one student among thousands. You are part of a global community that shares the same desire to learn, to grow, and to build a future. The afternoon brought another lecture, and this time it was in a larger hall with almost 200 students. And as I entered, I felt small, almost invisible, because the room was so big and the students so many, but I reminded myself that everyone here was new. Everyone here was trying to find their place, and I sat down in the middle, not too far in front, not too far in the back, and as the professor began speaking, I tried to focus, writing notes as quickly as I could, but I also noticed how easy it was to get distracted because some students were whispering, some were scrolling on their phones, and I told myself that I must choose what kind of student I wanted to be. And in that moment, I decided that I would discipline myself, that I would listen carefully, that I would not let small distractions steal my attention, because this was my chance, and chances like this do not come twice. And I wanted to use every moment wisely because I knew that the habits I built from this very first day would shape the rest of my university life and maybe even my future beyond. When the day of classes ended, I walked slowly through the campus, watching the sky turn from bright blue to the soft colors of evening. And I felt tired, but also deeply alive because this day had been full of new experiences, new faces, new lessons. And though my feet ached from walking and my head felt heavy from information, my heart was light, filled with hope, because I knew that I had taken the first step. And while the journey ahead would not always be easy, the fact that I had survived this first day gave me strength. And as I passed by the library, I stopped for a moment, looking at its tall glass windows glowing with light. And I thought about how many hours I would spend inside, reading, researching, preparing for exams. And even though it sounded difficult, it also sounded exciting, because every hour in that library would be an investment in my future. And the idea of that future made me smile, because it was no longer just a dream. It was real. It was happening, and I was living it. When I returned to my dormitory, I sat on the edge of my bed, opened my notebook, and began to write about the day, because I wanted to remember every detail. The nervous walk through the campus, the smile from Sarah, the introduction from the dean, the conversations with new classmates, the taste of cafeteria food, the challenge of large lectures, and the peaceful moment of watching the evening sky. And as I wrote, I felt grateful. Grateful to my parents who had supported me, grateful to my teachers who had prepared me, grateful to myself for never giving up, and grateful to the university for giving me this chance. And while I was writing, Sarah sent me a message saying, We survived our first day. Tomorrow will be easier." And I laughed softly to myself because she was right. Tomorrow would be easier, and the day after, even easier, because the first step is always the hardest. And now that step had been taken, the path ahead was open, and I was ready to walk it with courage and determination. And as I turned off the light and lay in bed, I closed my eyes with a heart full of dreams, whispering to myself once again, "Anna, you can do this. This is your moment." And slowly, with those words in my mind, I drifted into sleep, ready for tomorrow, ready for everything that was to come. The next morning, when I woke up, the sun was shining brightly through the window, and for a moment I lay still, thinking about everything that had happened yesterday, replaying each moment in my mind. And I realized that even though yesterday had been full of nervousness and uncertainty, it had also been filled with victories, small victories that gave me the strength to keep going. And as I stretched and prepared to face the new day, I promised myself that I would continue building on what I had started, because the first day was only the beginning, and today was another chance to learn, to connect, and to grow. And while brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered the same words again. "Anna, you can do this." Because self-belief, even in small whispers, becomes a shield against doubt. And as I walked toward my classroom with my notebook in hand, I noticed how the campus already felt different, less frightening, more familiar, as if by surviving the first day, I had earned a small place in this new world. And that thought made me walk taller, my steps more confident, because confidence grows not from perfection, but from persistence, from facing fear and moving forward anyway. And I could feel that growth inside me, slowly but surely changing me into the person I was meant to become. As I entered the lecture hall for my morning class, I saw Layla sitting by herself, and without hesitation, I walked over and sat next to her. And the smile that spread across her face made me realize that she too was looking for a friend, someone to share this new journey with. And we began to talk quietly while waiting for the professor. And she told me about her hometown, about her love for painting, and about how nervous she had been on the first day. And I listened with interest, feeling that a true friendship was starting to take shape. And I knew that in university, friendships are not just about passing time together. They are about supporting one another, about sharing the burden of stress, about celebrating small achievements, and about reminding each other that we are not alone. And as the lecture began, I glanced at her and felt thankful, because the simple act of sitting next to someone and saying hello could create a bond that lasts for years, maybe even for life. And that lesson was something I wanted to carry not just through university, but through every stage of life. Later that day, after classes, I decided to explore the campus library. And as soon as I stepped inside, I was struck by the silence, a deep silence that felt almost sacred, broken only by the soft sound of pages turning and the occasional footsteps on the polished floor. And I walked slowly between the tall shelves filled with books, each one holding knowledge, stories, and discoveries from countless minds. And I thought about how many hours I would spend here. And instead of feeling afraid, I felt excited, because this library was not just a building, it was a treasure chest. And every book was a key that could open a door to a new world. And I picked one book at random, sat down by the window, and began to read. And though I didn't understand every word, I told myself that it was okay, that learning is not about perfection, it is about patience. And I knew that the more time I spent here, the more confident I would become. And I smiled quietly to myself, because I could already see a picture of my future self, sitting at these very tables, reading, writing, and preparing for exams with determination. And that image made me feel proud, proud of the journey I had begun, proud of the steps I was taking, and proud of the woman I was slowly becoming. When evening came, the campus came alive with students gathering outside the dormitories. Some playing guitar, some laughing loudly, others walking together in groups. And I decided to take a walk around to feel the energy. And as I strolled past the groups, I overheard conversations in many different accents, some familiar, some new, and it reminded me again of how diverse this place was. A melting pot of cultures, dreams, and ambitions. And I thought about how valuable it was to be surrounded by such diversity, because every conversation was a lesson, every culture a new perspective. And the more I listened, the more I realized that university was not just about academic learning, it was also about learning how to live with others, how to respect differences, how to find common ground, and how to build relationships that cross boundaries of language and culture. And this realization filled me with gratitude once again, because I knew that each day here was not just shaping my mind, it was shaping my character, teaching me lessons that no textbook could ever teach. Back in my dorm room, I opened my notebook again and began writing because I had decided that I wanted to keep a daily record of my experiences, not just as a memory for myself, but also as a way to practice my English, because writing regularly would improve my language skills. And I wrote about Layla, about the library, about the lively evening outside. And while writing, I noticed how my sentences became smoother, how my thoughts flowed more clearly. And I realized that practice, even in small steps, makes a big difference. And I thought to myself that this was exactly how learning works, not in one giant leap, but in small steps, taking every single day. And I decided that I would continue this habit throughout my university life, because not only would it help me learn English, it would also help me understand myself better. And that kind of self reflection, I knew, would be as valuable as any lecture or textbook. Because to know yourself is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom is the true goal of education. And as I look back on that first day and the days that followed, I realize now that what seemed like a mountain of fear at the beginning was actually the foundation of strength that would carry me through the rest of my university journey. Because every nervous step I took, every introduction I made, every smile I returned, and every note I wrote became proof that courage grows in the smallest of actions. And I began to see clearly that university is not only about classes and books, it is about discovering who you are, building resilience, learning to live with people from every corner of the world, and believing in yourself even when doubts whisper in your ear. And though that young woman who walked nervously across campus on her very first morning did not know what to expect, she discovered that by facing her fears, by opening her heart to friendship, by respecting the value of hard work, and by never forgetting the quiet voice inside that said, Anna, you can do this. She had stepped onto a path that would shape her life forever. A path filled with challenges, but also victories. A path where mistakes would become lessons, and lessons would become wisdom, and wisdom would become the light guiding her future. And now, when I think about my first day at university, I no longer remember only the fear. I remember the courage, the laughter, the friendships, the hope, and the determination that began to grow inside me. And I know that for every young learner who listens to this story, the message is simple and powerful. Do not be afraid of your first step, because the first day, no matter how difficult, is the key that unlocks the door to your dreams. And once you open that door, The world of knowledge, opportunity, and growth will be waiting for you. And all you need to do is walk forward with courage, with persistence, and with the unshakable belief that you are capable of achieving more than you ever imagined.